huge issues in your relationship, whether by causing you to attack your partner or to retreat and shut down, we'd encourage you to seek help.
We're now going on to look at how important it is to agree on our priorities if we're to build a strong marriage. Our priorities in life will be determined by our values, and it's our values that affect the choices we make. For example, our values affect whether we spend money on a holiday abroad or save money for getting a home of our own. Our values affect how much energy we devote to things like our work or leisure activities, to our family and friends, to developing our spiritual lives, to being involved in voluntary work and so on. Our values affect whether we seek as big a wage or salary as we can, or we opt for a lower standard of living and less stress, or we go for a vocational career.
In a marriage, a couple may well have very different personalities and develop different skills. We may come from different backgrounds and have a number of different interests, but having similar core values and an agreed set of priorities will enable a couple to build a strong marriage.
We want to suggest that you set aside time to discuss together what your priorities are, and then work out if you're living in line with those priorities.
Because if we don't set aside time to decide on our priorities, what we want to give our time and energy to, it is so easy to get swept along by life. And that was certainly happening to Nikki and me. And then we went away on a weekend about a year and a half into our marriage, where an older married couple helped us to work out an order of priority for different areas of our lives.
And this order has been incredibly helpful to us for our decision-making ever since. Top of our list, we put our relationship with God because our shared faith is our highest value. Second, we put our marriage relationship as we recognize the need to give time to loving and supporting each other over and above every other relationship. Third, we wrote down children if and when we had them. Fourth, we put our work and our studies. I was a teacher then, and Scylla at the time was at art college. And fifth, we put spending time with wider family and our friends, and our involvement in our church community.
And since then, we've discussed other values that are important to us, such as keeping fit and being creative. But what we realized on that weekend is giving priority to the people and values that matter most to us doesn't just happen.
Certainly, we've had to be flexible due to changes in our working life or our family, especially when we had young children or one of our parents needed more care. But we also had to be intentional about what we prioritized.
And we found that when we prioritize the most important relationships, our other relationships also benefit. And it works rather like a cascading fountain. So what you see is that there's an overflow from one row to the next. When we prioritize time with the most important relationships, what's below also benefits. And Nikki and I still find when the urgent things in life take over from what's most important, we need to go back to our list. And that helps us to say no to other people's requests and demands where we need to, in order to live in line with our priorities.
We now want to look briefly at 4 areas that will be affected by our values and our priorities. First of all, friendships. The boundaries of our relationships are redefined in the light of our marriage. Now, we don't want to suggest for a moment that we should cut ourselves off from others when we get married. On the contrary, marriages need a network of support from family and friends, married and single. And it's one of the hazards of today's society that married couples can all too easily get isolated.
But we do also need to be realistic and protect our marriage from any relationships that might threaten it, such as spending time with former boyfriends or girlfriends by ourselves, or going for a drink after work with a colleague of the opposite sex on our own.
Affairs often start with intimate conversations, as emotional unfaithfulness usually precedes sexual unfaithfulness. Scylla and I hear of an alarming number of affairs that start in the workplace or online. So, setting and agreeing clear boundaries is so important in terms of where and with whom we spend our time.
One of the things I take most confidence in is that we're very transparent about awkward situations that might arise. And I remember Stephanie went on a work trip to Kosovo, and She was out with some colleagues, but at the time we had an Apple TV, right? And I don't know if Stephanie even knew, but the photos on the screensaver were synced to our iCloud account, right? So it would automatically upload photos from Stephanie's phone, and then those photos would display as the screensaver on our television, right? When it sort of, went dormant. And I was at home, and I had just gotten back from work, and the TV was on, and the screensavers were going, and up were popping these photos of Stephanie in this club with her friend and a random guy. And the photos went into sequence through the evening, and gradually, like, the buttons on the shirt of this guy came down throughout the night. And so I was sort of, I was piqued, by this. And Stephanie called me the next day, and she was like, "You would never believe the crazy evening we had." And she went on to talk about how this guy was essentially hitting on her on the bar. And she didn't even know I had seen these photos on the Apple TV, but the transparency and the honesty about that moment and saying, "Hey, this was a really awkward situation. And rather than hiding it from you, I'm going to be transparent and just tell you about it," that gave me a lot of confidence in our relationship.
We try not to do long periods of time away from each other. We try to, be wise, like go in, do what we got to do, get back.
But we also have built in a special way in which we meet each other when he returns back.
Yes, which is...
Let's just leave it at that.
My favorite.
I think another way we've protected ourselves is surrounding ourselves with healthy couples. It's so important for us to have relationships that are connected to our marriage, not me with the boys. How can we surround ourselves with healthy couples that now my relationship is connected to?
I think boils down to community, that we're not doing life alone.
The second area that will be affected by our values and our priorities is the value we place on children and family life. Many couples talk about having children, for all its hard work and expense, as the most rewarding and joyful activity they jointly undertake in life.
And you need to be sure that you've discussed this topic prior to marriage, and that your partner feels the same way about having children as you do. Otherwise, you could discover later on this fundamental difference between you in your values.
Some of you might have thought it strange that children were below marriage on the order of priorities that Scylla and I wrote down together early in our marriage. Putting children at number 3 is not to undervalue the gift of children, and it's not because children are less important, but because a healthy marriage contributes massively to a child's welfare and security. Children feel safe through their experience of a loving, stable relationship between those who are looking after them. And when so much time goes into looking after a child or children, the marriage can easily be neglected.
The third area that will be affected by our values and priorities is our work. Marriage isn't about competing with each other. It's not my career versus your career. Rather, our attitude should be, how can I help my husband or wife to fulfill the gifts and potential they have? You also need to talk about whether you both expect to carry on working full-time if and when you have a child.
It's a real challenge for many young couples to think about balancing time with a child and time at work. And I think that's one of the reasons why the couple really need to be a safe team together when they become parents. What your child most needs is you. Your child needs to know they matter to you, that they're special to you. It's like the parents are there as a safe haven for the child, and that makes the world a safer place for that child. That's where children grow emotionally. That's where children develop a strong sense of self. There, right in that drama. That's the one that matters the most. If you give children that, all the research says that they have the capacity to explore and find all kinds of other things for themselves. It depends on your priorities in life. And I think that's very difficult in the modern world because the modern world gets faster and faster. You can help each other be accessible, responsive, and engaged with your kids, which is what a kid needs. That's what a good love relationship is. And I think part of deciding to be parents is to understand that there are times when, yes, this task of being with your child is going to come first. And, hopefully you're going to support each other with that. So this is where a good marriage is the very best recipe for good parenting and a stable family.
The fourth area that will be affected by our values and our priorities will be the value that we place on spirituality. This area is around our core beliefs and how these are worked out in our day-to-day lives.
Exploring faith and spiritual issues and having open and honest conversations about what each of us thinks can draw us closer together as a couple. Part of the conversation should be around what you would each want to pass on to children. Would you expect to pray with them? Would you want to take them to a place of worship? Would you expect to read to them from a children's Bible?
And then it's important you know your partner's expectations for you as a couple. Do you expect to go to a place of worship together regularly? Would you like to pray together as a couple?
For Nikki and me, praying together is something that we have tried to do throughout our marriage as an outworking of our shared faith. Now, obviously, prayer is connecting with God, but it's also a way that we connect with each other and show support for one another. So we try to pray together each day, just for a few minutes. And we simply ask each other the same question: what can I pray for you today? And that helps us to know what's uppermost in each other's minds. And we then say a short prayer about what the other one has said.
Over the years, we've recognized we don't always feel like praying. But if we start by saying thank you to God, it changes our perspective and it helps us to see things more positively.
We've also discovered that praying together doesn't just happen. We have to be intentional about it, just as with our date night, and plan it into our day. But we know it is worth persevering, both because of the benefit for us as a couple and because we've seen that when we pray, things happen.
And we would say that praying together day by day is one of the most uniting, connecting things that we do. We've drawn a diagram to try to show how it works for us. You'll see at the top of the picture we've put God, with ourselves at the bottom two corners. And it works as a sort of a triangle, as we each look to God to receive and experience His love, His forgiveness, and a sense of His purpose for our lives. We've found we're better able to love each other.
Now, if you don't pray, you might consider another way of connecting with and supporting your partner every morning. You could simply ask each other, how can I best support you today? And then tell your partner if there's anything you're anxious about and if there's something that your partner could do to support you.
We want you to turn to the next conversation, working out your priorities. Ursula and me making a list of our priorities helped us agree on our values and live more in line with them. We want you to try to write a list of your top 5 priorities as a couple. Then put against each priority one way you would hope to live that out in your lives together.
Your list may look different to ours, so you'll see we've put some examples to help you to think through what your highest values in life are. And it'll probably take you longer than you have time for during this session, but we'd encourage you to make a start.